I'm trying to just take all of the things that I've read about Cardinal Brady the last few days, or what he has done in the last few days, and just pull out a couple of key points. There's so much in there. The richness of what he has been saying during these days, if you've heard it, this little document that you have here. But I just want to pull out a couple of them. That as you gather as pastoral councils, this should be a backdrop. Remember I said that part of your role as a pastoral council is to study? You take a document like this and you sit and you study it and you're saying, not just what is the Cardinal saying, but what is it saying to us as a parish? And where is the Holy Spirit calling us in the midst of this? That's the challenge always as a pastoral council. These are some of the things that I heard. That you are in the midst of transition, diminishment, and decline. He talked about the fact that there will be. He said all you have to do is look at the projection of where we will be with priests. Now, we're not doing that, remember, because of that, but it is a reality. He talked about the fact, look at the diminishment, that there are few people in some areas going to Mass. What do we have to do about those things? That's the pastoral council. Look at that, what you said before, it's right there. Because of baptism, and just listening again today to him at lunch, that issue of the call because of baptism kept coming up. This is the essence of who we are as Christians. Because we are baptized, we are called. We are gifted and called. I want to look at those two areas, because those are the two major areas for pastoral council. To look at people's gifts and to look at people's calls. We got to expand what we mean by that. The compassionate love. We have to emphasize the Eucharist, lay ministry, and the sharing of resources. But it all begins with the Eucharist. My favorite quote on the Eucharist came from your former Cardinal Sofield. As I said, we were talking today about the Cardinal just having gone to the Synod. Cardinal Sofield went to the Synod on the laity. And when bishops get up, or cardinals, they have what's called an intervention. And you're probably very familiar with Cardinal Sofield. He stood in front of all the bishops at the Synod. And he said, Paddy O'Shea was a man who went to church. He never missed a Sunday, but when he died, he went to hell for what he did on Monday. And then he sat down. When Cardinal Brady talks about the emphasis on the Eucharist, that's what he's talking about. That each one of you is being sent. When you go and you must live the Eucharist, you must become the Eucharist for people. You must become that compassionate hands and feet and eyes of Christ. That's the challenge. That's the beauty. That's what makes you alive. And the Pastoral Council keeps saying, how can we do this? I hope you're not an old-fashioned parish council. The old-fashioned parish councils, they were only concerned about organizing things. I was working one time in a diocese, and the priest had a parish council. He told me, he said, I said to the people, he said, 20 years from now we're not going to have a priest. 10 years from now we won't have a priest here. The priest will come in the helicopter. There'll be a helicopter pad here. The priest will land, and somebody will have set up an altar. He'll go out, he'll say Mass, and then he'll run back to the helicopter pad. Get in the helicopter, he'll fly 70 miles down the road, there'll be another helicopter pad. This is a true story. He said, I said to my parish council, what are we going to do about that? He said they spent the rest of the night talking about where to build the helicopter pad. Those were parish councils. That's not a pastoral council. This is what a pastoral council is concerned about. It's concerned about how do we look at the Spirit in the midst of what's happening to us. Don't try to deny it. It's there. The Spirit is calling us to something in that. How do we begin to help everyone to realize that what that baptism, the wonderful gift that we have? And then how do we do this all through the Eucharist, to get people to live the Eucharist? And I love when Cardinal Brady says, God has given us all the graces we need. God has given us everything that we need. The very beginning of his letter, God our Father gives us gifts of grace for every time and season. You've got everything you need in the parish. I'd like to suggest to you my model of pastoral councils. And I'm not saying it should be yours, but just to give you a model. And I've taken it from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. Let me just see how we do it. I've taken it from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. And it says the purpose of the parish pastoral council. Well, first you have to start with the purpose of the parish. You cannot be a good pastoral council unless you have first a good parish. What is the purpose of the parish? And I heard one bishop's conference say this, and I loved it. The purpose of the parish is to feed and nurture people, to be a leaven in society. You know what that means? That means you don't judge your parish on how much is going on within the parish walls. But when people are sent out of the liturgy, how do they become Christ's presence to others? That's the purpose. You feed people, you nurture people. You have to give people the Eucharist, you have to give them education, you have to give them the support that they need in crisis times in their lives. But that's not the end. Christian community always exists to be in mission. How do they go out and how do they become a minister in the daily circumstances of their lives? One of the goals, I believe, of pastoral councils is to help people expand their concept of what ministry is. I use an example that I learned here 2 years ago. And maybe the man who said it is here, and I hope it's okay to use the example. I asked the Archdiocese and Pastoral Council last time, when have you felt ministered to? Ask yourself that question. When I go to a parish, that's the question I always ask. I tell people, forget everything you've ever read about ministry. Forget any books or great homilies you've heard. And I want you to go to your experience. And I want you to ask yourself, when have I felt ministered to? When have I experienced ministry? And then I ask people to do 3 things with that. What was going on in your life at that time? Who did the ministering? And what did they do? And it comes out the same all the time. Ministry is primarily about compassion. That's what it's about. And when I ask them, where have they felt ministered to and when? Most ministry doesn't take place in the church. It takes place in the home and in the neighborhood and in the workplace. When I met 2 years ago with your Archdiocese and Pastoral Council, and I said, when have you felt ministered to? And one of the men stood up. As I said, he may be here. And I hope it's okay to use the story. He said, I can answer that question immediately. And then his eyes filled with tears. He said, I was 6 years of age, or I may have not the exact age. He, at this point, was probably about 76. And he said, I got an illness and I had to go to a hospital. And he said, I lived out in a farm far away from you. He said, and there wasn't, of course, at that time a lot of good transportation, so my parents couldn't get to see me too often. Young child in a hospital. Can you imagine what it was like? And he said the boy in the next bed was a Protestant. And he said every time that boy's family came and they brought him candy, they brought me candy. And he said every time they brought him ice cream, they brought me ice cream. Whatever they did for him, they did for me. And he said that's when I felt ministered to. When you think of when you felt, you want people to begin to say that everyone is called to ministry, but you don't want everybody doing something back in the parish. You want people to be living their ministry where they encounter people every day.